What a blessed morning we have here today. And I want to specifically call out our psalmist this morning, who proves that the power of voice does not come in pounds or inches, but in grace and love. That was wonderful this morning. And additionally, we have the joy of having so many new candidates and catechumens in the RCIA process. This is the largest group we have had as long as I've been involved, for 20 plus years now. The church is alive and well. And what is particularly fascinating is the candidates and catechumens are getting younger and singler. It used to be we mostly had married people who finally decided to join the faith of their spouse, or people who were getting close to the end and wondering if they were okay. But now we are seeing people who are looking at the world and saying, I can't take this. I need something more. I need something better. And the church is a powerful witness of a different way of looking at ourselves, at our fellow man, and at the world. A world filled with love. And it's a great blessing. And then to top it off, we have my favorite feast of the year. Can't mess with Christmas and Easter, of course, but if we're going to put those aside, Corpus Christi is awesome. And it's because the Eucharist is so awesome. You know, I often give a lesson to parents of children who are about to receive their first Eucharist, and we go over all of the sacraments in a little bit of an unusual way. I ask them to imagine 3 people, all of whom want to remain in good standing in the church. So they don't want to break any rules, but they have very different goals. The first one wants to receive the sacraments the absolute minimum number of times possible. The second person wants it the average number of times that a good Catholic would. And the third person is off to set a world record. They want to have the sacraments the absolute most times they could and still be in God's grace. And so it ends up being this fun exercise of considering odd things like how many times a man could get married if his wife keeps mysteriously dying. And what if there was some person who sinned as little as the Virgin Mary? And how we would figure out all of those possible scenarios. But the point of the exercise is to show how the Eucharist, along with confession, are the backbone of our ongoing sacramental life in the church. Think about it. Yes, baptism is wonderful, but we're only baptized once. The same for confirmation. Hopefully, unlike the earlier man, we're only married once. And sure, we'll receive the anointing of sick a few times in our lives, probably. But other than that, it's mostly ones and twos, except for Eucharist and confession. Confession we should be receiving hundreds of times in our lives, and the Eucharist even more, thousands of times. And this is why I love Corpus Christi. We are celebrating what the Catechism calls the source and summit of our church life. I do want to bring up one important point, one that I think we need to ponder. And it starts with a question. Why is it that reception of the Eucharist is so tightly tied to participation at Mass? I mean, we could imagine an environment where Father, once every couple months, consecrated, 20,000 hosts, and then they were made available whenever people could come, that you didn't have to sit through Mass. You could just have the grace of the sacrament whenever you wanted. We could get creative and put a drive-through out front so we could get it on the way to work or whenever we needed it. The grace of the sacrament would be available. But we don't do that. We don't make it that accessible. The church tightly couples it to where we are expected to participate in Mass if we are to receive the Eucharist in most normal circumstances. And the question is, why? To answer this, I'd like to use an analogy. I think we could think of the Mass like Thanksgiving dinner. And the Eucharist is the turkey. It is the center point. Now, personally, I love a good Thanksgiving turkey, probably more than the next guy. But if we're all honest, what makes Thanksgiving special is not the turkey by itself. No, what makes Thanksgiving great is the love shared within the family. It's an event where we put aside our daily lives and come together to be in communion with one another. And so if we were to try to reduce the Eucharist to a private consumption of the body and blood of Christ, it would be no different than believing we could emulate the gifts of Thanksgiving by ordering a turkey sandwich from Subway. So I think we need to spend some time reflecting on this broader sense and purpose of the Eucharist. Christ did not give us the body and blood of his body and blood so that we could consume a magic cookie that gives us grace. No, look how he did it. He sat down at the greatest feast of the year and instituted the Eucharist as part of that meal. And he told us to do that in memory of him. Christ gave us the Eucharist as part of a great feast so that we would be in communion with him and with his church. And remember, who is his church? It's us, the body of believers. We are the church. And so the Eucharist is for all of us to come together in communion with one another and collectively to be in communion with him. And without doing that, the Eucharist loses the vast majority of its meaning. And so we must ask ourselves, why are we here today? Why did we make the effort? Are we here to share in a great feast with each other and with God? Or are we falling into a subtle temptation to debase and to cheapen the Eucharist and to see this as merely a mechanism for a drive-through window for a turkey sandwich?